So, this is going to be a brief video about the life and works of the Renaissance painter Titian. Note that his name is Titian. I originally thought you said it Titian, but I looked up one of those videos on YouTube that tells you how to say stuff, and it's Titian. So here we have two of his self-portraits. There he is, right there. As you can see, Titian was a very handsome, very attractive man. So I thought I'd start off by giving you a little bit of background on his early life. The year of his birth is actually disputed. For a long time, it was thought to be 1477, but now some historians are dating it as late as 1488. But for the sake of this video, we'll just say the year of his birth was 1477. The name given to him at birth was actually Tiziano Vecellio, which I think I said that right. But nowadays he's of course more commonly known as Titian. He lived in the lovely alpine village of Pieve di Cadore, which I also think I said that right. It's just north of Venice. He lived with his father Gregorio, who was a minor public official, and he also lived with his mother and older brother. So, at the age of 8, Titian went into Venice with his brother, and he began apprenticing with various Venetian artists. Now, the most notable mentor he had was probably Giovanni Bellini, who at that point in time was probably the most prominent Venetian painter. And Bellini's influence on Titian was pretty pretty profound. A lot of art historians tie Titian's iconic use of oil paints to create deep and rich colors. They tie it back to Bellini. Now, fun fact about Titian, in his early years as a painter, he often collaborated with one of Bellini's other pupils who he had studied with, Giorgione di Castelfranco. Um, and the early styles of the two were actually so similar that art historians have trouble telling them apart. And some even believe that a number of Castelfranco's works have been attributed to Titian. Okay, now that we have a bit of background on Titian's early life, I'm going to start talking about some of his more important works. And the first one we're going to look at is called Assumption of the Virgin. But before I start digging into what this painting means and what it really is, I'm going to give you a few moments to absorb the majesty of the painting, to really let it hit you. And for your pleasure, I will provide some calming background music. Here we go. Wasn't that lovely? The Assumption of the Virgin was finished in 1518, and it's located behind my high altar in the church of Santa Maria dei Frari. And similar to many other churches of that time period, when you step into the church, your attention is funneled to one focal point. In the church of Santa Maria dei Frari, that focal point is the high altar and the Assumption of the Virgin behind it. Um, it's a really grand location for a painting of such grandeur. And I choose the word grandeur for a specific reason. The painting is grand. It stands nearly 23 feet tall, and as you can see, the colors are sumptuous and vivid and bring a lot of life into the painting. When the painting was unveiled in 1518, it was pretty much immediately regarded as a masterpiece, and many of Titian's contemporaries came to see it. So the Assumption is actually a Catholic feast day, celebrated each year on August 15th, and it's exactly what you might think. It's the celebration of the ascension of Mary into heaven after her death here on earth, and that's exactly what Titian depicts in his painting here. So he divides it into three distinct sections. At the base section, at the first one, You have the apostles who look up at Mary as she ascends with varying expressions of shock and awe and sorrow for losing her. And the apostles here are still bound to the earth. They're still earthly, as shown by the blue sky that you would see here on earth. And then beginning in the second section, you have this division from the first. You have this line of clouds and angels that sets the rest of the painting off from the apostles and the earth. And this section is the focus of the painting. This is where you have Mary, and she looks calm as she ascends. You know, she has her face and arms kind of raised up in exaltation, finally towards the top section where we have God. Um, and he looks down on Mary and the apostles kind of benevolently. Um, and around them, around Mary and God, you have this glowing golden light that obviously, suggests holiness and divinity and purity. And it's interesting because here Titian kind of creates this hierarchy of holiness. At the base you have the apostles who are obviously the least holy, and at the top you have God who is the most holy. And this hierarchy of holiness is something that's really typical of earlier art. So in this way, Titian is looking back at earlier art for inspiration. But at the same time he's looking back, he uses this new technique of linear perspective. He knows that the onlooker is going to be standing at the base of the painting, and so that's where the perspective emanates from. And at the same time, he creates kind of another hierarchy. Well, I guess you could call it more of a pyramid. It's a pyramid of color. So at the bottom, you have two of the apostles who are wearing red tunics, and their red tunics kind of guide the eye up towards the red robes of Mary, which are kind of, flowing freely about her. And her red robes finally guide the eye up to God, who's wearing this dark, dark red tunic. If you compare Assumption of the Virgin to a similar earlier art piece, in this case Cimabue's Madonna and Child, you can see a lot of resemblance. Obviously, both pictures are pictures of Mary, and both of them she's wearing red and blue robes. She's surrounded by angels. Both have a pretty prevalent golden tinge, and both are paintings for churches behind the altar. But obviously, there are also some pretty striking differences as well. Um, Assumption of the Virgin was only painted a little more than 200 years after Cimabue's painting. And while that sounds like a long time to us, um, if you consider in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that long at all. And so the progress that was made in painting during this time period it's pretty amazing. It was groundbreaking. Titian depicts Mary as very lifelike, very full of emotion. Um, she's in movement, whereas Cimabue depicts Mary as stoic and sedentary. And this is done without sacrificing any of her apparent holiness. Titian makes her much more realistic without making her any less holy. In fact, one could argue that she seems even more holy because you can relate to her much more. Um, but this is important because it reflects the Renaissance idea that by understanding the mathematical rules of nature, you're brought closer to God. By depicting figures as much more realistic and lifelike, art is brought closer to God, is made that much more holy. So that was Assumption of the Virgin. The next painting I'm going to talk about is called Bacchus and Ariadne. Bacchus and Ariadne is actually a Greek mythology story, so I'm just going to give you a summary of that story so you're all familiar with it. So Ariadne was the daughter of King Minos. She was the princess of Crete, and she was the person who helped Theseus, who I'm sure you've all heard of, slay the Minotaur. Um, she gave him that ball of yarn that he used to track his way in and out of the labyrinth. So after Theseus slayed the Minotaur, um, he returned to Athens with Ariadne because they'd fallen in love. But along the way, they made a pit stop at an island where Ariadne fell asleep, and Theseus decided he was going to leave. He packed up and he sailed away and left Ariadne on the island alone. Titian actually included Theseus leaving in his painting. You can see him right there. There he goes. He's a zooming out of there. Um, Understandably, Ariadne was pretty upset that her lover had abandoned her. But not long into her sorrow and suffering, Bacchus, the king of wine, showed up with his inebriated entourage. He saw Ariadne and he immediately fell in love with her, and he offered her a crown of stars as a gift. So that was the story of Bacchus and Ariadne. Now, I don't know if you have noticed, but there's kind of a lot going on in this painting. Um, you have Ariadne on the left, who, like Mary in Assumption of the Virgin, is cloaked in red and blue. You have Bacchus kind of in the center. He's the one that's drunkenly leaping out of his chariot. A chariot, for some reason, pulled by cheetahs. I'm just as confused about that as they are. Um, there are a couple of satyrs that are waving around various limbs of cattle. There's a guy getting attacked by snakes. There's a lot going on, but there is a method to his madness. Um, so Bacchus and Ariadne was commissioned by Alfonso d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, in 1523. So it has a kind of a diagonal focus. So if you can imagine a line going from around the top right corner to the middle left, that's where the focus lies. So in this painting, Titian again applies this technique of linear perspective that I've talked about. Whereas in earlier paintings, the heads of figures would be all be set at the same level, Titian spreads the heads out over the canvas. Um, and the sizes of the figures and their surroundings um, are based on the location relative to the viewer. So in this painting, he really shows off his mastery of linear perspective. Additionally, he borrows this style of kind of twisted forms based on the idea that in every human body there's a divine soul, but it's trapped in the corrupted matter that is the body. These twisted and convoluted forms show the soul trying to break free from its physical prison. So this is kind of something that you'll see a lot in Michelangelo's work too, because he believed in this idea. Uh, Furthermore, the twisted bodies show off the greater anatomical understanding of the human body that developed during the Renaissance. They again suggest this familiar Neoplatonic Renaissance idea that holiness and inner beauty is reflected in the physical form. So, Bacchus and Ariadne is just one of many paintings that demonstrates the fascination Renaissance thinkers had with the ancients and their vibrant pagan culture. And it was this fascination that marked the important change that was happening at the time. While the ideas of the Greeks and Romans were being synthesized with Christian beliefs, and while Europeans remained devoutly Christian, the wide popularity of these distinctly non-Christian ideas revealed the weakening power of the church and foreshadowed the events that would come because of it.